The first time Trent Caldwell called me legacy, he said it like a medical diagnosis. He leaned back in his glass office, tapped my salary line on a spreadsheet, and smiled as if the numbers were the only proof he needed. My name is Mason Hale. I am 46. I have spent 12 years building a distribution network for Northline Parts Group that moves $200 million of components every year across 7 states. If you have ever wondered what keeps an auto plant from shutting down, it is not the motivational posters. It is somebody like me making sure the right pallet arrives before the wrong bolt becomes a 6-figure problem. Trent was new, 32, crisp suit, perfect teeth, a doctorate in buzzwords. He was the new Vice President of Operations Excellence, a title that sounds like a trophy and functions like a machete. He summoned me on a Thursday at 9:20 a.m. and delivered the news with the warmth of an elevator voice. "We are restructuring logistics," he said. "I found someone who can modernize the division for 60% of your compensation. You understand digital transformation." He let that last phrase hang like incense. I asked, "Who is my replacement?" "A junior analyst. Smart kid, great with dashboards. He starts Monday. Please document your workflows by end of day Friday." I blinked. Friday is tomorrow. Trent smiled. "Your processes are systematic, right? Should be easy." That was the hook, the trap. He believed that because the operation ran smoothly, it must be simple. That is the executive version of seeing a calm ocean and assuming the tides are a myth. I walked back to my office, a plain room with filing cabinets full of supplier manuals, storage hazard charts, and the kind of handwritten notes you only keep when you have saved a company from itself more than once. I tried to write a transition document anyway. Vendor contacts, seasonal rotation rules, buffer stock thresholds. The reason Zone 3 holds temperature-sensitive coatings away from rubber seals. The reason our Ohio hub never ships winter transmissions through Phoenix in July. 3 pages in, I stopped. Not because I lacked knowledge, because knowledge without context becomes a landmine. My so-called replacement would think he understood it because it was written, then blow a hole in the floor by trusting it. At 2 p.m., Trent walked by and said, "How is the handover coming?" I replied, "Thorough." He nodded like he had just bought himself a miracle. That evening, I told my wife Kara at the kitchen table. She listened, steady, then asked, "Severance?" "None," I said. He wanted a cheaper body, not a clean exit. Kara did not panic. She is a nurse. Nurses are trained to stay calm while other people fall apart. "We will budget," she said. "But you are not going to beg that kid." "No," I said. "I am going to let him own his decision." Friday morning, I arrived early, packed my personal items, and printed my transition packet. It was 13 pages of sanitized information and 3 pages of warnings in bold that Trent would ignore. At 4:15 p.m., my phone rang. It was Caleb Monroe, our longtime vendor manager for Precision Bearings. He sounded tense. "Mason, why am I getting a new point of contact email from a kid asking for everything in spreadsheet form?" I exhaled. "They fired me." Caleb swore under his breath. "That is absurd. You are the only one who understands the packaging requirements for our sealed sets." I said, "Hold your schedules. Do not accept changes without confirmation from compliance." He paused. "Should I tell someone higher up?" I thought about the quarterly operations review scheduled for Monday morning, the one I had presented at every quarter for years, the one Trent had not even asked about. Then I remembered one person who always cared about reality. Elliot Granger, Chief Operating Officer. He was not my boss, but he knew my name because I saved the company 2 years ago when a supplier tried to price gouge us during a production crisis. Elliot respected results. He also hated surprises. I opened my calendar. My standing quarterly prep call with Elliot was set for Monday at 8 a.m. Trent had fired me without considering that Monday exists. So I made a decision. Not loud, not emotional, just precise. I would not warn Trent. I would not plead with HR. I would let Monday arrive like a bill. And while everyone else spent the weekend pretending this was normal, I spent mine preparing the cleanest revenge on earth. A reality check with timestamps. Monday morning at 7:55 a.m., I sat at a diner 2 miles from headquarters, coffee black, phone on silent, and my laptop open to a single folder named Q1 Review. At 8 o'clock, Elliot Granger called. "Mason," he said, brisk, ready to talk metrics. "I want to finalize the supplier performance deck before the board meeting." I said, "Elliot, I cannot. Trent terminated me Thursday." Silence hit the line so hard I heard the diner vent fan more clearly. "He did what?" Elliot asked. "He said he found a cheaper replacement and wants dashboards." Elliot breathed out slowly. "Stay where you are. Do not drive in. Do not answer anyone else yet." Then he hung up. At 8:17, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. HR. I let it ring once, then answered. "This is Denise from HR. We see a termination processed under your employee number. Did you meet with Trent Caldwell?" "Yes." "Was severance offered?" "No." "Was a performance reason stated?" "No." "He said cost reduction and modernization." Denise typed for a long time. Then she said, "Thank you. We will contact you shortly." At 9:05, Trent called me for the first time since firing me. His voice sounded polished but strained, like he was holding a smile in place with tape. "Mason, there has been a miscommunication. We need you in for the quarterly review today." I said, "You fired me." He cleared his throat. "Administrative confusion. We can reverse it. Come in and we will discuss a compensation adjustment." I asked, "What about the replacement?" He hesitated. "That candidate is no longer available." Translation: the kid realized he was being used as a discount bandage for a complex operation. Trent continued, "Corporate expects the distribution efficiency analysis, the supplier variance report, the compliance review. Nobody else can assemble it in time." I let a beat pass. Then I said, "I believe you called my work legacy." That word again. He tried to laugh. "Look, I misspoke. You know how leadership language can be." I said, "I know how disrespect sounds when it is wearing a suit." Trent shifted tactics. "Mason, you need to understand you are hurting the company." I replied, "Trent, I am not doing anything. You are experiencing your own decision." He went quiet. Then he said, "Name your number." I almost laughed. The audacity, the sudden respect when the building was on fire. I said, "I am available as an external consultant. New rate, new contract, no employment." Trent snapped, "That is unreasonable." I said, "It is premium. Emergency response costs more." Then I ended the call. My phone exploded by noon. Warehouse supervisors, dispatch leads, vendors. I answered only Benji Carter, a shift supervisor I trusted. He sounded exhausted. "Mason, we have 3 trucks waiting on bay assignments. The new system says Bay 9 is open, but Bay 9 has a hazmat sealant spill and is locked. The kid is insisting the dashboard is right." I said, "Bay 9 is physically closed. Use Bay 14 and reroute the inbound lane through the north gate. Also, tell him the dashboard is only as smart as the person who asks the right questions." Benji laughed once, bitter. "I will try." At 2:00, Elliot called again. "Mason, the board meeting is at 4:00. Trent is in my office sweating through his shirt." I said, "Elliot, I am not coming back as an employee." Elliot paused. "What do you want?" I told him my terms. Consulting contract. 3 months minimum. Increased rate. No forced handover of my methods. Clear scope. And a clause that any vendor relationships I brought remain mine to manage directly. Elliot said, "Send it. Now." I drafted the contract at my diner booth. Clean, simple, iron. I emailed it to Elliot with one line, signed copy before re-engagement. At 2:47 p.m., I got the signed PDF back. At 2:52 p.m., I got a text from Trent. "Fine. Come fix it." I stared at the screen and smiled. He had finally said the truth. I walked into Northline headquarters at 3:20 p.m., wearing the same plain jacket I wore on warehouse floors. No tie, no performance. I was not an employee. I was the fire brigade. Trent met me in the lobby, jaw tight. He tried to put a hand on my shoulder like we were teammates. I stepped sideways. He withdrew his hand like he touched a hot pan. "Conference room," he said. Inside sat Elliot Granger, Denise from HR, 2 finance people, and Trent, who looked like he had aged 5 years since Thursday. Elliot slid the signed contract across the table. "We are aligned." I nodded. "Good." Trent tried one last bite. We still need your process documentation for continuity. I looked at him. My expertise is not a PDF. It is a service. Denise cleared her throat. We agree. Trent glared at her. Of course he did. Elliot asked, Can you get us through the board review? Yes, I said. But your internal dashboards will be inaccurate until we fix inputs, not visuals. Trent said, The dashboards are the point. Elliot said, Trent, stop talking. That was the first time I saw Trent realize he was no longer the main character. I went to my old office. My cactus was gone. My chair was moved. Somebody had already erased me. It felt cleaner than I expected, like ripping off a bandage. I opened the supply chain console I built over a decade, not as code, but as process. I knew where every brittle point lived. I also knew which people could be trusted with the truth. First, I called Caleb Monroe at Bearings. Confirm packaging rules. Freeze changes. He agreed instantly. Second, I called the Midwest coating supplier. They were furious because Trent had demanded a price cut and threatened to replace them with overseas product. They refused emergency shipments. I told them, that threat is not company policy. Send the load. I will personally sign off. They agreed because they trusted me, not a title. Third, I walked to the warehouse floor and found the junior analyst, Kyle. He looked pale, laptop open, dashboards full of green. He said, I think the system is bugged. I said, the system is fine. Your assumptions are bugged. He swallowed. They told me it was basic inventory tracking. I nodded. They lied. Kyle looked at me with something like relief. What do I do? I said, listen more than you type, and stop believing green lights. At 3:55, I joined the board meeting via video from a quiet room. Elliot introduced me as External Operations Advisor. That phrase sounded expensive. I delivered the quarterly review calmly. Supplier performance, variance explanations, efficiency gains, risk flags. The same content I had always delivered, except this time I said one extra sentence. These results depend on institutional knowledge and long-term vendor trust. Replacing expertise with cheaper headcount increases operational risk. I watched faces react. The board does not love drama, but it hates risk. When the meeting ended, Elliot stayed on and said thank you. Then he added, off record, Trent is done. I asked, fired. Elliot said, reassigned at minimum. But the board wants answers about why he tried to cut a critical function with no plan. At 5:12 p.m., Trent cornered me in the hallway. You embarrassed me, he hissed. I smiled. Trent, you embarrassed yourself. I just refused to wear the costume. He said, this is not over. I replied, actually it is. I do not work for you anymore. I walked out, got in my truck, and drove home with a contract in my inbox and my dignity intact. Revenge is not always loud. Sometimes it is a signature line. 3 weeks into my consulting contract, Northline started running smoothly again. Not because the dashboards were prettier, but because the right people were finally allowed to run the machine. Kyle began asking real questions. Benji stopped apologizing for reality. Vendors started answering calls without sounding like they wanted to scream. Then Elliot called me on a Wednesday. Mason, he said, the board wants a post-incident review. They want you to present, and they want Trent in the room. I laughed. This should be educational. The review was scheduled during the annual leadership event, Summit Forge, Northline name for a week of speeches and catered meals. Trent loved Summit Forge. It was his habitat. In the auditorium, Trent sat in the front row with a forced smile, surrounded by executives who now knew his cost-cutting had nearly triggered a compliance failure. I opened with a hook that was not about him. It was about the lie. A stable operation looks simple, I said. That is the most dangerous illusion in business. I showed a timeline. Thursday termination. Friday vendor confusion. Monday failure cascade. Monday board risk spike. Tuesday emergency contract. I did not raise my voice. I did not insult. I just narrated cause and effect. Then I presented the real scorecard. Missed shipments, dock conflicts, hazmat mishandling, vendor refusal, compliance calls. Finally, I displayed the cost. Emergency fees, penalties. Lost trust. The total was 7 figures. A murmur rippled through the room. I turned to a slide titled, Ownership of Expertise. Replacing people to reduce salary can be valid, I said. Replacing expertise without understanding it is gambling. The house always wins. Then Elliot asked me, live Mason, what prevented this? I answered, respect, process, and a transition plan longer than 1 day. Trent raised his hand like a child, which was fitting. He stood. This narrative is unfair. We were innovating. The old way was not scalable. I looked at him. Trent, you do not innovate by setting the warehouse on fire and calling it heat mapping. Some people laughed. Most stayed quiet. The quiet was worse for him. After the session, Denise from HR pulled me aside. He used that phrase, she said, about you being legacy. He also told Kyle that the job is easy because it is mostly spreadsheets. Denise hesitated. We have statements. I said, good. Document everything. 2 days later, a company-wide email arrived. Subject, Leadership Realignment. Trent Caldwell was no longer Vice President of Operations Excellence. He would be pursuing opportunities outside Northline. No explanation. Just removal. Kyle texted me, is it true? I replied, it is true. Kyle sent back, I am sorry he did that to you. I replied, learn from it. That is the best apology. The funniest part came the next week when vendors started calling me directly, not Northline. They wanted assurance that operations were stable. I told them, I am under contract. I will keep it stable. They relaxed. Relationships follow people, not logos. Elliot called again. Mason, I want to talk about something long-term. He offered me a new role. Director of Network Continuity. Higher pay. Authority over logistics changes. Direct line to the Board Risk Committee. I said, I will consider it, but my condition stands. No cheap replacements without transition. Elliot said, agreed. That night, Kara asked, do you feel better now? I thought about Trent's face in the front row, listening to 7 figures of consequences. I said, I feel lighter, like I finally stopped carrying somebody else's ego. Kara smiled. Good. Now build something that deserves you. I plan to, because revenge is satisfying, but building a better future is cleaner. 6 months later, I accepted the role Elliot offered, but only after I wrote the job charter myself. Authority over process, not titles. Vendor management protected. A training pipeline so no single person holds the entire map. Northline changed because it had to. Kyle became my first apprentice, not because he was the smartest, but because he learned humility fast. He stopped worshiping dashboards and started walking the floor. Benji joined our Continuity Council, a small group that reviewed changes before any executive could push a shiny button. The council rule was simple. If you cannot explain the downstream impact, you do not touch the lever. At home, my son saw the shift too. Not just in finances, which stabilized quickly, but in my posture. I stopped bringing work stress into the kitchen like a shadow. Then the last ripple arrived. A vendor forwarded me an email from Trent. He was pitching himself as a logistics transformation consultant and asking for introductions. The vendor wrote one line. Should we ignore? I replied, yes. Also, keep this email. Because I am not cruel. I am practical. People like Trent do not stop. They rebrand. A week later, I received a call from a competitor company, Rivergate Distribution. They had heard about the Northline incident and wanted advice. I told them the truth. You can automate routing. You cannot automate trust. They hired me for a short audit. I did not poach. I did not scheme. But my reputation traveled ahead of me, and it did work. Meanwhile, Northline continued to improve. Our Board Risk Committee began tracking institutional knowledge as a measurable asset. Training hours became a KPI, which made me laugh because the only KPI that matters is whether the right part arrives before the line stops. One afternoon, Elliot walked into my office and tossed a small item onto my desk. It was a laminated badge from Summit Forge with Trent name on it, found in a box of old event materials. Elliot said, I kept it. Reminder. I looked at it and said, better reminder is the 7-figure loss spreadsheet. Elliot smiled. True. Then he got serious. Mason, Thank you for not burning bridges. I said, I did not burn bridges. I refuse to be burned. That is the difference. The final scene happened a year after that Thursday. I was touring the new Ohio hub we built with a proper transition plan. Kyle walked beside me with a clipboard. He asked the right questions, and he listened to floor staff like they mattered. A forklift operator pointed at a pallet and said, "This one is labeled wrong. New guy did it." Kyle started to scold. I lifted a hand. "Mistakes happen," I said. "We fix, we teach, we move." The operator smiled, relieved. Kyle looked at me. "That is leadership," he said. I nodded. "It is also logistics. You do not punish the machine for being human. You design systems that catch errors before they become disasters." Later that night, Kara asked if I ever thought about Trent. I said, "Only when I need a reminder of what arrogance costs." I opened my laptop and looked at the current dashboard, the one Trent worshipped. It was green, calm, beautiful. And now it meant something, because behind it was a network of trained people, respected expertise, and a transition plan that would survive any one person. That is the best revenge. Not watching someone fail, watching yourself thrive in a system that finally understands your value.